Good afternoon and welcome back to Edinburgh to Mike and Joe's virtual live tour from the Royal Mile. So we're sticking to the Royal Mile. As I mentioned in our last tour, Edinburgh is a tale of two cities. We have the Old Town and the New Town. We're staying in the Old Town. Now, as a result of our last broadcast, and I'm pleased to say we had over 12,000 views, so thank you very much, guys. It's great for us that you're watching us, and I hope you're enjoying it, entertainment-wise and hopefully educationally as well. But again, I've got a few shout-outs for you here. So I'm going to start off this time on the west coast of the US. I'm going to say hi to Limia and Nick. Now, Limia was supposed to be here this year with her mother. Unfortunately, circumstances as they are, couldn't make it.
She's on here to start.
Is Limia on there? Hi, Limia. So I hope to see you here next year as well. And remember, I do love See's candy. That's a request going in there. Now I'm going back to Arizona. Last week I mentioned a young lady called Fern Junzo. And I'm going to mention her again because she didn't have her hearing aid in the last time. So hello, Fern! Turn your hearing aid up so you can hear me. Now, Fern was with me about 2 years ago. She was in Scotland at the age of 93, but she was in good company because she had her sister-in-law Elaine with her, and Elaine was 91. Still going strong. Great to see you. And I'm also going to mention James. James was on the same tour. It was a Lutheran church tour, and they all came to Scotland together as a group with Pastor Hines. So hi to Arizona and the States. Now I'm going down to Florida. Excuse me, I'm going down to Florida. I'm going to say hello to Mark and Alex. Again, Mark and Alex, they were supposed to be here this year, but unfortunately, same situation, they had to postpone till next year. Hopefully see you next year. And I cannot go away without saying hi to Clifford and Sandy. Clifford and Sandy were with me about 2 years ago. We did a round Britain trip. It was a great trip. Started off in Edinburgh, finished in London. Hope you're all well there down in Miami. Take care of yourselves.
Madeline Jordan says hello, Joe.
Hello, Madeline. How are you doing? I was over in New York City to see Madeline. Hi, Madeline. Good to hear you. How are you doing? Great. Glad you're joining in here. Now, I've been asked a few questions. The first question was about our kilts. So today, the kilt I'm wearing here, or the tartan I'm wearing, is the World Peace Tartan. Have a good look at this. The first recipient of the World Peace Tartan was actually the Dalai Lama when he came to Edinburgh. You can go into there is a Facebook page about the World Peace Tartan, so take it, have a look at it, and enjoy it. I also had a little question about, so, what is that little pouch that Scotsmen wear, and what do they keep in it? Well, this is called a sporran. Sporran is from the Gaelic language, and it means a purse. So what do I keep in it? Well, this is the 21st century, so let's have a wee look, shall we? Okay. So I keep my cell phone. I keep my hand spray, my gel, and 21st century people, I keep my face mask as well. Always wear it in public places. Listen to the medics. And Mike, you'll never believe it, but we asked the question. I don't think we've ever been asked this before, but I'll share it with you. What does a true Scotsman wear under his kilt? Well, the answer, dear heart, is his dignity. Let's leave it at that, shall we? Thank you very much. If you want a shout out next time, get in touch with us through either instant message us through Facebook or drop us a line, and we'll try and do a shout out, birthdays, anniversaries, wherever you are. And also a little bit more about the tartan. You don't have to be Scottish to wear a kilt, and you can also wear any tartan you wish. Now, tartans are traditionally associated with the clans in Scotland here, but there are tartans for various organisations. There are tartans for all the states in the Union in the United States, all the provinces in Canada, all the territories in Australia. They all have different tartans. You may not have known that. But also organisations have tartans as well. So the NYPD, New York City Police, they have their own tartan. The City of Edinburgh has its own tartan. The Scottish Tour Guides Association, of which we are members, has its own tartan as well. So Joe and Mike are members of the STGA. Google us up, you can get a profile on there as well. And we are qualified Blue Badge members.
Nicola says, shout out to Brenda Toppin, who's 87 today.
Hi Brenda, 87 today. Brenda Toppin, how are you doing? So let's get on with our tour. So we're back here on the Royal Mile. I want to introduce you to one of our great characters here called Willie Brody. Now, Willie Brody is known as Deacon Brody. He was a deacon of the Guild of Trades. He was also a member of the town council. We're talking in the middle of the 1700s here. He was very well to do, very well connected. That's so good so far. However, he also had a habit of gambling. He also kept mistresses. He had about 5 children to these mistresses who didn't know each other and didn't know the wife. He was a gambler. He would bet on cockfighting. His lifestyle outpaced his earnings, however. So what did he do? Well, he started to go on the rob. He became a robber. Now, the Guild of Trades, he was a cabinet maker, he was a locksmith, and he was various other things as well. But he would know the habits of the well-to-do of Edinburgh and all the wealthy, and he would entertain them. He gathered himself together a little gang of ne'er-do-wells here in Edinburgh. And what he would do when he was making keys for the well-to-do, he would make a copy. So while he was entertaining them, or if they were at the church on a Sunday, he knew their habits, he knew where they would be, he knew the houses would be empty, and he would go in and rob them. So he was good during the day, and he was bad at night. Split personality of Deacon Brody. Now, Deacon Brody also designed scaffolds, or gibbets as we call them here. However, one day they decided to rob the excise office, him and his gang. He managed to escape from it, but one of his gang members got caught and turned king's evidence. Deacon Brody escaped, ended up in the Netherlands, but he was captured, brought back to Edinburgh, and he was put on trial. And he was taken down to the front of the cathedral, where we're going to go quite shortly, and he was put into a prison in Tollbooth Prison. And they built a scaffold of his own design, and he was hung from a gibbet of his own design. So that's the story of Deacon Brody. Now, if you're famous or infamous in Edinburgh, you will invariably get a pub named after you. Now, we're just going to walk down here a little while, and coming into view, you will see the pub of Deacon Brody. This is a live broadcast, so here's our chums here with their dogs, out walking their dogs. You can see that life is coming back to Edinburgh again. We're coming out of lockdown here. Our tour buses have started again. The law is, when you come to Scotland, you must wear a mask when you're in a closed environment, such as shops, and also when you're on a bus or any part of the public transport. So we're walking down the Royal Mile any second now. You'll see there's a little pub over here called Deacon Brody's Tavern. All the pubs in Edinburgh, we're going to let some people pass here. We don't want to block the pathway.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Now, all the pubs in Edinburgh, if you're looking for good food, when you're here on tour, go into the pubs. Upstairs of Deacon Brody's Tavern, lovely restaurant. It's quite a traditional pub, and you'll see some traditional characters from Edinburgh as well. Let's walk down, and we'll head down the Royal Mile. I mentioned in my last tour that the Royal Mile connects the castle, famous Edinburgh Castle, which is at the top of the Royal Mile, to the palace, which is at the bottom of the Royal Mile. Any Doctor Who fans here? These are the old police boxes that you see in the streets here. This is what we call the TARDIS. I'm sure a few of you have seen Doctor Who. Now we're going to cross over the street. Now, word of advice to those people who do not live in the UK and who do not live in a country where they drive on the wrong side. We do drive on the wrong side in this country. Always use the safe crossings. Do not dash out across the street. If your loved one is halfway across the street and the red light goes red, take my word for it, it will go green again. Do not put your life at risk by running after them, okay? Little safety advice. As we're walking down here, crossing the street, we can scan over to the side here, and you'll see this beautiful building with a green dome. This is the headquarters of the Bank of Scotland. The Bank of Scotland was itself established in the end of the 1600s. This building goes back to the 1800s. It looks very, very small from this side here, only 3 floors, but if you go to the other side of the building, it drops down another 4 or 5 floors. On one of our later tours, we'll show you the other side of the Bank of Scotland. And I forgot to say bonjour and bon après-midi à nos amis en France aussi. Bonjour, la France. So we're waiting here to cross the street. Now, speaking to our French colleagues here, I'll introduce you here. This building here used to be the Edinburgh City Chambers. This is where people used to get married in the civil ceremonies here. This is now the Institut Français, and it's also the Consulate General of La France. Now, back in the end of the 1700s, Edinburgh was going through the period known as the Scottish Enlightenment. All new ideas were emanating from this city, whether it was philosophy, economics, science, geology. This place was bursting with new ideas. It became to be known as the Athens of the North. Now, one of the most famous characters, or not one of the most famous, but one of the famous characters from that period was David Hume. And you can see his statue here. Now, David Hume was an interesting character. He went to university when he was 12 years old. He was a great philosopher. He was an essayist. He was also a bit of an economist as well. He was well known throughout the world, and people came to visit him, and he travelled widely through London, over to France, and he met with all of the great intellectuals of his period. He applied to be the professor of moral philosophy at Edinburgh University, but was refused, mainly because he was an atheist. But if we walk across here, Mike, if we can get across here, take a little closer view. You see the picture of David Hume? Here he's dressed as a Greek scholar or a Greek philosopher, wearing his robes. I think it'd be a bit chilly to wear a robe like that here in Edinburgh in the middle of winter, don't you think, Mike?
Yes.
But here we go, there's David Hume. Now, David Hume was a pragmatist, he was a skeptic, and he was also an atheist. Now, traditionally, there is this habit of people, the tourists coming here and touching the toe of David Hume. I don't know if you can get in there, Mike, and see it. It's a little bit more golden than the other toe. My advice, when you come to Edinburgh, do not touch the toes or the nose of our statues. And I'm not saying this to preserve the statue, I'm just saying this for your own health. I don't worry about coronavirus and touching that. I'm worried more about norovirus. Believe me, I've been in a situation where people have ended up stuck in their hotel rooms for a couple of days because they may have touched or mistouched one of the statues. So this tradition of touching the statue actually came from the philosophy students at Edinburgh University. The story was that before your exams, you come up here and touch the toe, which is ironic because David Hume was an atheist. He despised any form of superstition. So he would be turning in his grave the fact that people are coming here full of superstitions and touching his toe to help pass your exams. Believe me, if you want to pass your exams at Edinburgh University, open up your books and get your nose into them. Don't worry about touching statues, that will get you nowhere. Let's move across the street again. How you doing? Now, I mentioned in our last tour about bringing water into Edinburgh and that these tall buildings, they didn't have running water. So they had the water carriers known as caddies who would bring the water up. However, at the end of the 1600s, beginning of the 1700s, they actually started to pipe water in from the hills which lie to the south of Edinburgh. The hills are a higher elevation, so through pure gravity and wooden pipes, the water would come in and they filled a reservoir which was built up near the castle. To provide water to the city, they produced wellheads all down the Royal Mile. And we're just going to go over to the wellheads here.
Checking out your World Peace Tartan.
Hi Victor, it was actually Victor who turned me on to the World Peace Tartan, so thank you very much Victor Spence, good to see you. I've already mentioned the World Peace Tartan, I've introduced it, hopefully a few people will be going on to the website. And I mentioned that the first person to wear it was the Dalai Lama when he came to Edinburgh. Thank you Victor. Also going to give a little shout out to a little school in Manhattan, Alexander Robertson School in Manhattan. Hopefully some of the people there are watching it. I had the pleasure of walking with them in the parade in New York City just a couple of years ago. So hi to everybody at Alexander Robertson School. The school's a primary school, been established in the late 1700s in Manhattan, and it educates the kids according to the egalitarian principles of Scottish education, and it's open to anyone. Hi, Alexander Upson, to all the primary school. So this here is one of the wellheads that was established here in Edinburgh. This is where you would get all your gossip when you came to Edinburgh. This was a 1700s version of the water cooler. This is where you get the gossip. This is where you get the propaganda. This is where you get your news. This is where, if you were going to be seditious, you could give false propaganda here. This is where you get the little maids coming down. You were getting to find out who was doing what to whom as well. So this is where all of the water cooler talks were taking place here at these wellheads. All the gossip was learned from here. So we're moving into the square properly. Maybe Mike can give us a sweep round here and you get an idea of the buildings, the grandeur of the buildings here. Behind David Hume Tower, we have this beautiful building here. This is the highest court in Scotland. This is the High Court of Justiciary. It's a court you don't want to visit unless you want to be a spectator. And sweeping around here, you can see some of the tenement buildings that actually are on the Royal Mile. And just to the east, you'll see the beautiful facade of St Giles Cathedral. We're going to talk about St Giles in a bit more detail when we get there. But before that, we've got a few more statues that we want to talk about and introduce you when we come into the Parliament Square. This is the old Parliament Square. Now, one of the buildings one of the statues or monuments that I want to introduce you to is this monument here, this green monument. Not the one in front of it. I have no idea what this structure here is. The man with it looks like something out of the Lord of the Rings with his unicorn. I don't know what it's got to do with Edinburgh, but it's one of the parts of the street theatre you see when you come to Edinburgh itself. They're here every year. Taking a little bit further on, we're going to go to the statue here. This is the Duke of Buccleuch. The 5th Duke of Buccleuch. And you can see him standing in his glory with his robes. Ceremonial robes. The robes are part of the Order of the Thistle, the highest order of chivalry here in Scotland. Now, the Duke of Buccleuch got his title of the Duke when he was about 11 or 12 years old. He inherited vast swathes of land across Scotland and also in parts of England. This monument was actually dedicated to him and paid for by public subscription. He was also a member of Parliament, very wealthy man, and he also opened up the coal fields here. He made a lot of money. His full name, to give him his full title, was Walter Francis Montague Douglas Scott. That's a bit of a mouthful. So the 5th Duke of Buccleuch and the 7th Duke of Queensberry, 2 dukedoms. Very, very wealthy man. The panels around the monument actually depict parts of the Scottish history on the lower panels. And if we come around this way, Mike, you actually see there's a few characters here we'd like to see. There's one here we can see, Queen Elizabeth I is here. It looks like she's entertaining Francis Drake or one of her courtesans. And then round here, her troubled cousin, Mary Queen of Scots. I did get asked, are we going to talk about Mary Queen of Scots? Yes, indeed. We could not do a whole tour of Scotland without mentioning Mary Queen of Scots, but she will come up in one of our later tours. So the lower panels about parts of the Scottish history. The upper panels are really about his life, the Duke of Buccleuch's life. Paid by public subscription. I just wonder if I had enough money in those days. I'm usually on the wrong side of history, Mike. What about you?
Yes.
I'm never usually in a position to contribute to public schemes like this. Again, it's like me and the Queen. You know, the Queen has a garden parties. I've never been invited. I guess the Duke of Buccleuch would never invite me to his place either. In this area here, there used to stand a prison. It was known as a Tollbooth Prison. It was a place that was feared and hated here in Edinburgh. It got the nickname the heart of Midlothian. And indeed, it was in the prison that stood here that Deacon Brody was held before and after his trial, before he got hanged by the neck. And many other celebrities in their day spent their time here. Some of the patriots who were accused of sedition were tried here, and again many people were executed here as well. And on the sidewalk here and on the pavements you will see there are some dates here that relate to the Tollbooth Prison, and it dates back to 1430. So you got the prison here. It was also the town hall and it was a court, but the prison was the one that everybody remembers. So you had the people who were brought in, accused of crimes, in front of St Giles Cathedral and put into the prison. So on one side you've got salvation with St Giles Cathedral, and here right next to it you've got damnation at the toll booth. So it was known as the Heart of Midlothian. Now the Heart of Midlothian was also a title of a book by another one of our authors, Sir Walter Scott. Sir Walter Scott was probably the most prolific writer in the English language of his time. So again, we're looking at the end of the 1700s, beginning of the 1800s. He was widely read. He'd been the J.K. Rowlings of his day. People could not get enough of him. He wrote prolifically, and one of the books was The Heart of Midlothian. Now, to commemorate the Heart of Midlothian, which was the name of the prison here, in Edinburgh, we have put on the sidewalk here the shape of a heart of Midlothian. Now, Edinburgh people and Scottish people in general are very well known for the healthy disregard for authority. So one of the things traditionally they do here in Edinburgh is that to show your disregard for authority and also for the bad memories of the toll booth, people tend to spit into the Heart of Midlothian. Few people have been there. I don't want to focus in on that too much, but it is a tradition here in Edinburgh to go and spit in the Heart of Midlothian. Now, I do have an engraving here, which I will show you. I'll bring it out of my bag here. And this engraving is taken at a different angle than we're at the moment. We'll show you the Tollbooth Prison, which is here, right next to St Giles Cathedral here. This is how close they were in proximity. So you can actually look out your window and you see all the well-to-do and the well-heeled of Edinburgh going into St Giles for their Sunday services and the weekday services. You'd be languishing in prison here, and it was not a pretty place to be incarcerated. So let's talk a little bit about St Giles. St Giles is the patron saint of Edinburgh. He became the patron saint around about the 1100s, and this church was dedicated by David I of Scotland. He dedicated the original church here. St Giles is normally associated with the south of France, St Giles. He is the patron saint not only of Edinburgh, he's also the patron saint of lepers. He's the patron saint of breastfeeding mothers as well, and a few other things. Now the story goes back to the 600 AD. Giles himself was born into a wealthy family, but he saw the poverty that other people were living in the countryside. So he himself took a vow of poverty. He took himself into the forest. While he was in the forest, he made friends with a little deer. The deer became his pet. While he was walking through the forest one day, the king of the Visigoths, who had invaded France, was out hunting. They saw the deer and decided to hunt the deer. The deer ran back home towards St Giles, or Giles as he was known then, before he became a saint, and Giles put his arm around the deer to protect it, and the arrow went into his hand. And this will be what you'll see when you see pictures of St Giles or St Giles. You'll see it clearly depicted. And if you come to the front of the doorway here, under the portico of St Giles Cathedral. Now it's called St Giles Cathedral, but it's a bit of a misnomer. This used to be a Catholic church, but during the 1500s and 1600s, Scotland went through the Reformation, so we went from being a Catholic country to a Protestant country. In the Church of Scotland, we don't have cathedrals as such. So this is also known as the High Kirk. If we come up the steps a little bit, you will see above the portico here the image of St Giles with his arm round his deer and the arrow going into his hands. Now, going back, I had a few questions also about the Reformation, about the difference between the Church of Scotland and the Church of England. Well, they're quite different. The Church of England is very similar to the Catholic Church in that it's hierarchical. In the Church of England, you have bishops and archbishops. In the Catholic Church, you have bishops, archbishops, and cardinals. In Scotland, we have no bishops, no cardinals. It is a level church. The philosophy is there should be nobody between you and your God. So it's quite a leveler. And even when the Queen here comes here to Scotland, she is not the head of the Church of Scotland. She is the protector of the faith, but she's not the head of the Church of Scotland. Again, this goes back to our philosophy of a healthy disregard for authority. So I'm going to hand you over to Mike. Mike is now going to talk about a little bit more about the architecture of the building, and we'll take you a little bit further around the square here in Parliament Square in Edinburgh. So just bear with us a minute. We will do a little handover as we normally do. Michael buttoned up. Say hello to Mike.
Hello. Welcome to this second part of the tour. My name is Michael Turpey, and I'm enjoying this tour begun here by Joe. I'm learning a lot as well from another side of things. And we're going to leave this area in front of St Giles to walk around the back. But before we do, I want to point out this building here, which is the Signet Library. It's the 19th century with kind of Georgian motifs, classical motifs around the top here. And this was the Advocates' Library. It's like a sort of club for some of the top law people here in Edinburgh. So a legal practice is one of the main activities back in history, but also today, and its most elegant interiors as well. Okay.
Nicola's saying that she loves your hat.
Oh, right, this is a Glengarry. It's a very kind of comfortable hat. It's made of wool and it folds in two, which makes it even more easy to stow away. So I'm a piper as well, so I sometimes wear this when I'm playing my bagpipes. Right. So this is a view of the Signet Library here. Joe spoke earlier about the Criminal Court, which was a building where there was a statue of David Hume outside, but this is kind of the Court of Session. And this is a court which oversees government lawmaking and even challenged the British government down in London over the recent Brexit debate here. So we have got our own system of law, which is different to England. It's most elegant, as you can see. This was a city of enlightenment, wonderful classical motifs in the building here. And this type of building with the blocks is called rustication. And that is where the blocks are very kind of obvious because they've been really carved out in between. So it gives a great feeling of solidity. And above this, we call it ashlar, where it's much more smooth and it's very much in the human proportion to be good on the eye so everybody can enjoy. It's supposed to be an engaging type of architecture, which isn't hugely monumental and overbearing. So again, connects with Edinburgh's enlightenment of the 18th century in particular. So you can see these areas, these little covered walkways where the top legal people would be perhaps debating cases. And inside here is Parliament Hall, because Scotland had its own parliament up until the 18th century in 1707, before we connected with England. And you can still go in there today, and it's got some most wonderful interiors and magnificent stained glass. So we're just wandering around, and if you look up the top, some incredible, what look like sphinxes, Egyptian motifs, but they have got women's heads on them there. So there's a huge, curious mixture of Egyptian art as well as Greek art combined here, which we call kind of neoclassical in style. And if you will look at the columns, these are what we call Ionic Capitals, the wee curly bits at the top, if you look just in the corner there above the arches. Right.
Saying hello from Protection Island or Douglas Island.
Oh my goodness. Hello, Kate. I hope you're enjoying our tour. At the moment, I don't know what your weather is like, but we've started off with a very sunny start, blue skies, and then it was kind of clouded over, and that is what Scottish weather's a bit about. We get all the seasons in one day, so it's a bit of an art form knowing how to dress yourself. But we get a lot of sun and a lot of beautiful weather. I'm not just saying that because I'm Scottish, so it's got a really good climate, quite a cool climate sometimes. Right. Now we're coming to this statue, and it's the first lead statue, and it portrays King Charles II. Now, King Charles II wanted to change the religion of Scotland from Presbyterian, which had been from about 1560, and take it to more an Episcopalian, more a Catholic form of religion with bishops. And the Scots wouldn't really have that. So he wasn't the most popular person, but because of him, there is a legacy in the fact this Presbyterian Church of St Giles is called a cathedral. It shouldn't really be called cathedral because it doesn't have bishops. As you can see, it's quite a kind of impressive monumental sculpture, somebody that appears very much in control. There is an unfortunate, or there used to be an unfortunate side to this sculpture, in that when it rained very heavily, the statue would leak underneath, which would appear like the horse was relieving itself. But we're hoping that that's all been sorted today, but that really does appeal to our kind of Scottish sense of humour. Okay, you see the wonderful architecture here, and on the side, on the right-hand side, notice the stained glass, because this is a Thistle Chapel, which is a part of St Giles Cathedral, and it was built in 1911. But the idea of a chapel with Knights of the Thistle, an order of Knights of the Thistle with medieval jousting and honouring people, heroic figures, a bit like Game of Thrones if you like, was back in the Middle Ages, but it was revived by our King James VII in the 17th century at Holyrood, the Abbey of Holyrood. But the people didn't like it much because he was a Catholic king, and there was rioting during procedures at this original 17th century Chapel of the Thistle, so it went out of use, this idea. But then it was revived in 1911, and today there's 16 Knights of the Thistle who come and meet when the Queen is in town. And one of the last Knights of the Thistle to be made a Knight of the Thistle is Prince William, and he's got his allocated chair inside this building. It's richly decorated in the kind of Gothic arts and crafts style, and masterminded by a leading architect called Robert Lorimer. And it's got three pipers, three piping angels. And I can connect with that. I won't admit to being an angel, but I'm a piper. And close to here is a restaurant bar called Angels with Bagpipes, and that is why it's got that connection. So the Thistle Chapel, most amazing. We're going to wander further over here.
Francesca Carville there saying, loving the tour.
Oh, great. Hello, Francesca. And now we, over here, there are two buildings, the building further away from us, it was the Royal Exchange. And it was an attempt to get the merchants to meet indoors and carry out the business indoors. I'll speak more about that as we get closer, but in front of that is the Market Cross. Now, the Market Cross was a symbol of trading because this was an old mercantile city going way back to about the 11th, 12th centuries. And we have a record of a Market Cross dating back as far as the 14th century, would you believe? Although this actual example doesn't date till then. It went through various transitions, the Market Cross. It was also a place for royal proclamations. For instance, great decisions that were made by the monarch. And today, when a monarch dies, then the new king or queen will be announced from the balcony here underneath this Market Cross. It was also a place of punishment as well as proclamations and a focus of trade. So three main different uses, and it's just amazing, and it's got some of the coats of arms of the various regions of Edinburgh scattered about it here. I'm going to wander across the Royal Mile here, and just ahead of us we are coming up to what used to be the Royal Exchange, but today is called Edinburgh City Chambers and is the seat of local government. Now, this is a popular location, and most recently there was a television series called Belgravia that was made here in the city, and they used the frontage of the city chambers as a setting for that. So if you're into period drama, you might like to go and catch up with Belgravia, and you'll recognise bits of Edinburgh, but also Braveheart, would you believe? A part of Braveheart was filmed here also. So maybe you want to have a look back at that film and see if you can recognise this location. Now, underneath here is a war memorial with the red poppies, and it commemorates the people who died from Edinburgh, primarily in the First World War. And it is very much a focus of remembrance to this very day. On Remembrance Sunday, people will gather here, and usually the First Minister will be here, as well as the Lord Provost, who is the Scottish kind of version of Lord Mayor. So wonderful. And if you notice these archways, this was old Edinburgh. It was a kind of, although the building dates to the 18th century, originally there was all these covered arches to encourage tradespeople who had shops and open-air booths to get shelter, and this was a kind of reference, although it was never really used very much. It was used occasionally, but not so much as they maybe would have hoped, called booths or Luckin booths. I'm going to wander us into the square here in front of the City Chambers, and today the Lord Provost of Edinburgh will hold meetings in here. But we've got the statue, and in fact there's going to be somebody coming in at the moment, and we've got a bollard that is going to go down into the pavement to allow this car to go in. But I'm going to take us over to see the statue, this equestrian statue. Okay. Today this City Chambers is also an events centre. You can hire it as a wedding venue and various other purposes, but I'm going to get us to come around the other side so that we can view the young Alexander Emperor at age 13 years old, and the horse Bucephalus. Now, there was a bit of a bet on that Bucephalus was such a wild, angry horse that nobody could tame him. But young Alexander at age 13 said, I can do it. And people just wouldn't believe him. So what he did do was turn Bucephalus to the sun so that Bucephalus couldn't see his shadow, and he was able, Alexander, to mount the horse and tame the horse because he had identified that that was a factor in the wildness of the horse. But this has got another story. It was made by a sculptor called Sir John Steele, and he was a 19th century sculptor, very famous, and he was commissioned to do this. And the horse, it was said that he was having to wait on payment because the commissioners ran out of money, and he decided, he got quite angry at this, and he put pig's ears on the horse. Now, many people think this is an urban myth that tourist guides talk about, but there is a cast of this actual horse showing it with proper horse's ears. So we can vouch that John Steele was displaying his anger in an artistic way. So this statue was not here originally. It was in St Andrew's Square, which is in the new town of Edinburgh, because John Steele was known for sculptures in the new town, not so much in the old town, but it was shifted over here as well as other statues because they were getting in the way, would you believe, because we had too many statues. So I'm going to move us.
Susan Taylor was saying, I was at my cousin Claire's wedding here at the City Chambers.
Oh, Susan, I know, it's amazing. I've actually piped for people here, and it's one of the most beautiful interiors, a wonderful venue, quite memorable to get married in here. And if you see the rich architecture again, we've got what we call Corinthian capitals on the top of these the base columns. The columns are not real columns, they're actually sinking into the architecture. But this was John Adam, brother of Robert Adam, one of the great architect families of Scotland who designed this Royal Exchange. The kilt I'm wearing today is McNaughton Tartan. I think I mentioned that the last tour. I've got several kilts. I've lost count the number of kilts I have because I'm a great kilt wearer. I wear it most of the time and not just when I'm guiding. And it's very smart. You just have to add a different style of jacket, make it look really smart and formal, or you can tone it down to be much less that and more casual. So we're going to have a wee look at this here. Now, we'll have a look at this one here, yeah. J.K. Rowling. This is like Grauman's, our version of Grauman's Chinese theatre in Los Angeles, where people would sink their hand prints into the cement or into the sand and would make an image of it. And of course, J.K. Rowling has got strong associations with Edinburgh, and her book Harry Potter, very well read, of course, during the 1990s. She wrote chapters of the Harry Potter novels. In fact, some of the chapters in the first one, The Philosopher's Stone, in a cafe here in Edinburgh. And there are several cafes that actually claim the fact that she actually composed Harry Potter there, but we have got one for sure that we know. And J.K. Rowling today has got one of her homes in the city, but we've got other famous people. We've got Sir Chris Hoy here, who was a medal-winning Olympic cyclist, and we've got George Kerr, who was a judo expert, and we have got Ian Rankin. And if any of you are familiar with the Inspector Reeves novels, which are very much set here in Edinburgh, Ian Rankin, a great admirer of Arthur Conan Doyle, and some of that sort of mystery comes into his stories. Now, I want to tell you something because there is a building close by on the left called Mary King's Close, and it's a kind of underground attraction, but how is it there? An ancient 17th century close or enclosed street. It was because many of the streets were truncated, many of the closes were closed off for the building of this Royal Exchange, and they became the foundations of this Royal Exchange. So Mary King's Close, from during the time of the start of this building, remained very much as it was. So it is a popular place to go, and the guides will tell you a few ghost stories and stories about the plague, terrible plague that hit Edinburgh in the 17th century. and it's spooky, but I won't say too much more about that just now. But Mary King's Close is part of this complex of Edinburgh City Chambers. Now we'll just wander us through here. And I've got a visual thing I'm going to show you shortly. You can see this guy's kilt here. It's quite unusual because it's a plain colour. It's a kind of tweedy colour kilt. Now, if I can walk us down past the city chambers, and you can see St Giles here. I must tell you about the spire of St Giles. We used to talk about this as being a 16th century spire, which was put here by James IV. But would you believe we've actually found out by dating of the timber by archaeologists and researchers that the wood goes back to the 15th century. And now we're believing that this, the inner part of this spire dates back to the time of King James II. That kind of contradicts the earlier idea. So it was a different spire going back to the 15th century. And what you can see basically was a rebuild, an add-on in the 17th century. So the external stonework isn't quite as old as people thought before, but it's amazing because it's got that much older side of the 15th century, and then it's got a later side too. Now the cockerel, the rooster at the top, it was the case that all church spires above the weather vane were encouraged to have that because it was Peter who betrayed Jesus, and Pope Nicholas in the 9th century advised all ecclesiastical buildings to have a cockerel or rooster, symbolic of that betrayal at the top as the number of times the cock crowed. So we've got the rooster. I'm going to take us to this next bit here. Okay. I'd just like to enlighten you as to the architecture on this side of the street. Over on the other side, you can see where it says Old Fish Market Close, and there was a fish market there, and there's a later sculptural installation with fish, which is quite amazing and beautiful. But if I stop here and point out this line of buildings, this was the site of a terrible fire in 1824, called the Great Fire of Edinburgh. Because many people associate great fires with London, but we had a terrible event in an engraver's workshop. And this man called James Kirkwood, on a second floor flat above Old Assembly Close, at about 10 o'clock at night, his workshop went on fire, and there was so much wood in the fabric of these buildings that it caused a huge fire that went on for 5 days and destroyed much of the original older buildings, which had a lot of wood in them, including the old assembly hall associated with Old Assembly Close. Now I'm going to show you the conflagration on this old graving here. I'll just tuck this water under my... And you can see here, and if you look on this building here, you can see the steeple of the Tartan church, which is just down here. And the original steeple was in the Dutch style of architecture, and it was absolutely ravaged by that fire, and there's stories of lead melting off the roof and dripping down onto the street below. And as you can see, the rebuild of the steeple was in the 19th century, and it wasn't in the Dutch style of architecture. So you've got a 17th century church building at the bottom with a 19th century steeple. Now, about 500 families lost their lives in that dreadful fire, but it was convenient to some people because they wanted to extend the law courts, and many of the residential buildings were up in arms that they were not going to be moved out of their houses. So as the fire swept on and on, many people were smiling and thinking, oh, this is very convenient, we can actually do that now all around St Giles. So the buildings you see down here are 19th century, very plain residential buildings or tenements, and it's kind of a very loose Georgian style of architecture. Now finally, I'm going to speak about this person here. It's Adam Smith. You know, Edinburgh, great city of enlightenment, and Adam Smith was a political economist. He was born in Kirkcaldy in Scotland, and he was also chair of moral philosophy at Glasgow University, and he believed very much against mercantilism, which was to colonize countries, to shut down their exports so that they could be markets for a certain country who would be exporting to them. So it kind of connects with Britain's place as having many colonies, because it could build up through the East India Company to suppress anybody that was making anything and wanted to sell it, but they would use these places as a resource to get the raw materials from. Mercantilism, and it was to make your country as strong as possible. But people like Adam Smith realised this wasn't good, and he introduced the idea through the writing of The Wealth of Nations of laissez-faire, of free trade, so that people could come and go and have imported goods as well as exporting their goods. So it's a very forward-looking idea. And today we have got what we call a mixed economy, although that can change depending on who's in power down in London. But it means that we have got a relatively free trade between different countries where we don't put up great tariff barriers to suppress them. And he, again, a great enlightened figure, Adam Smith, and a friend of David Hume, and also of Benjamin Franklin. Okay, now we're coming to the end of this little tour, and I'll finish off here at this great statue of this 18th century enlightened figure, and I'll just say thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you'll join us on another tour. We're going to cover the whole of the Royal Mile, and then we'll be moving further afield out of Edinburgh at various times. It gives you a snapshot of how Edinburgh is just now. It's gradually opening up. We have got a mandatory regulation that if you are going into shops that you must wear a face mask, and I don't know if Joe showed you his, but here's mine. It's Tartan, and I believe that's Cameron Tartan face mask. I would put it on, but I have to wear that when I'm going shopping. So I'll just thank you very much for joining us. We are members of the Scottish Tourist Guides Association. We're Blue Badge Guides. We've done our training at Edinburgh University, and a very strict training it was too, to give us the skills for guiding groups, and especially just now after the COVID crisis, to guide groups safely in Edinburgh. So I hope you'll make it over one of these days, and thanks for joining us. I don't know if...
Thank you from me too.
Okay.
Limya says thank you for a lovely tour.
Oh.
Thank you, Limya. Okay, bye-bye.